Thank you. Good morning? No, good afternoon. Hello and welcome to the 33rd Annual International Festival of Authors at Harbourfront Centre. My name is Andrew Piper. I'll be your host and moderator for today's event. You heard just now about Dawit Isaak, one of 9 Eritrean journalists held for more than a decade without charge or trial. PEN Canada's advocacy has led to the release of more than 45 imprisoned writers. If you'd like to support PEN's efforts to secure Dawit's freedom, please sign the petition outside after this event, and I'm sure there's unanimity in wishing for that. Just to give you an idea of the format today, we'll do a roundtable and discussion while I will ask questions, and there will be presumably answers. And then we'll do that for about an hour, but I think I might make it a little bit shorter because there's so many of you, which is great, and I think Q&A from the floor is typically more interesting than the questions I might have. And there are 2 microphones, kind of Oprah style, on either side of the stage. So when it gets to that stage of the thing, if you do have a question, please, if you're able, come to the mic and speak into it. There will be no intermission. This year, the IFOA is a social media friendly festival as well. So you're welcome and in fact encouraged to tweet away during the middle of it. That will not be considered rude. So please silence your phone, but at the same time make any kind of status updates you want. And the tweet for the IFOA is @IFOA using the hashtag IFOA. Also, this event is part of the Edinburgh Writers' Conference, and if you want to add the hashtag to reference that event, it is a bit of a mouthful, hashtag World Writers Conf. At the end of the event, the authors will be happy to sign books in the Marilyn Brewer Community Space in the York Quay Centre, which is just outside here. Books by all of the authors of the festival are also available for sale in our bookstores at both those locations. Well, there's 2 locations, the other one. On with the event. Today's roundtable discussion on the topic of zombies, witches, killers, and cowboys, visions of the future novel. With this event, the International Festival of Authors, in partnership with the Edinburgh International Book Festival and the British Council, brings to the stage a unique series from around the world. This is the Toronto segment. We would like to welcome our delegates, and there's a number of them here in the front, that will be taking part in the latter part of today's panel. But first, let's hear from our authors on stage. So come on up, guys. I will introduce them as they proceed and get mic'd and settled. First, here she is, Deborah Harkness. Deb is a professor of history at the University of Southern California. She's the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships. Her publications include works on the history of science, magic, and alchemy. In her first novel, A Discovery of Witches, Harkness offered an unexpected answer to the question, if there really are vampires, what do they do for a living? Politicians. Harkness's second novel, Shadow of Night, picks up where A Discovery of Witches left off, journeying through a world of alchemy, time travel, and magical discoveries. Deborah Harkness's appearance here today is made possible by Penguin Group Canada. Second, Alan Mattich, who was born in Zagreb, Croatia, and grew up in Libya, Italy, Canada, and the USA. He went to McGill University for his undergraduate degree and did postgraduate work at the London School of Economics. A financial journalist and columnist, he's now based in London and writes for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal. Mattich's debut novel, Zagreb Cowboy, opens in the crumbling state of Yugoslavia in 1991, where in the midst of the chaos, secret policeman Marco Della Torre has been working both sides of the law. Alan Mattich's appearance here today is made possible by House of Anansi Press. Third, Joe Nesbø is a musician, economist, and the best-selling author of the Harry Hole, it's pronounced differently, I'm just going to call him Harry Hole, detective series. He has won many prizes for his novels, including the Glass Key, the Riverton Prize, and the Norwegian Book Club Prize. His first novel to be published in English was The Devil's Star, and the second, The Redbreast, was shortlisted for the Duncan Lowry International Dagger. In The Bat, the first book in the Harry Hole series, Hole is sent to Sydney to investigate the murder of Inger Holter, a young Norwegian girl. Joe Nesbø's appearance here today is made possible by Random House Canada. And finally, Corey Redekop is an actor waiter. Not at the moment, he's not waiting on you right now, but he knows how to wait. And disc jockey, cameraman, editor, publicist, librarian, and now an author. Corey Redekop lives in Fredericton, New Brunswick. His first novel, Shelf Monkey, was widely praised. Redekop presents his latest work, Husk, which centers on Sheldon Funk, a struggling actor who dies in a bus restroom only to awaken during his autopsy and realize he has become a zombie. Corey Redekop's appearance here today is made possible by ECW Press. So let's get started. I'm going to make my way over to my chair. Begin, oh wow, by becoming suddenly louder. I wanted to ask you about the monstrous as a concept. Deb, you write about, or at least your novels are populated by witches and vampires. Corey, you have zombies. So there's, of course, a supernatural version of monsters that you, at least two of you, write about. But of course, monsters can be human, too. Alan, you have corrupt cops and plenty of thugs. Joe, you have murderers in your series. I'm curious how, for each of you, how you came to your particular version of the monstrous. What attracted you or compelled you to create the monsters you write about? And secondly, what do you think that there's a human need for monsters, whether they are real or imagined? We seem to need them. We certainly love to read about them. What is it about the human impulse that seems to create monsters if we don't have enough of them? Can we start with you, Deb, maybe?
Sure. I think we all need monsters to think with, in a way. That monsters become these places where we park our anxieties, our issues, our concerns. And I think this is one of the reasons something like a vampire isn't the same in the early 19th century, the late 19th century, because there are different issues that are consuming people at that moment. I think that's why you see a kind of recycling of these creatures. They come back after long periods of absence. So for me, one of the monsters that I brought back was the demon, spelled with an A, which was a classical spirit of inspiration and then became demonized in the Christian West in the Middle Ages. The A dropped out and suddenly they started having glowing red eyes and leading you to Satan, but that's not how it was. The spirit of inspiration at the beginning. So it is a kind of an interesting thing to select out the monsters that are useful for whatever issues you want to talk about. I think that it's wrong to think that there's some kind of a monster orthodoxy. Vampires must always be X or witches must always be Y. And I think it's that sense of play that's what makes it really, really unique. I also think, however, that humans make the monsters and that I find human monsters much more scary than your average zombie, witch, etc.
Well, maybe we'll go right to the zombiest. Corey, what do you make of it? Of the monsters?
Well, I mean, I've always loved monsters, but I love the monsters that I love the most. There's an intrinsic sadness to them. I mean, all they are really is following their instincts. I mean, this is what they are, or what they were created to be, what they were meant to be, and the fact that they're vilified for the most part in novels and in films. I always find a certain sadness in that. I mean, you can certainly see that in the classic vampire films of Dracula. And I mean, there's a romance, but there's a slight just a tinge of melancholy about it because he's a slave to his instincts, and he's even though he's basically blameless because of that. We all have our instincts, and it's just a shame that because of that he's vilified. Even though obviously vampires do horrible things and zombies do horrible things, but can that? It shouldn't act. I mean, I don't want to say as an excuse, but they're just being what they are. I mean, you don't condemn the lion for killing the gazelle. Why do you condemn the zombie for killing, a hobo?
I've never thought about that.
Yeah. Nothing against hobos, by the way. People have said, have you got some sort of hobo vendetta? I'm like, no, no, I don't. So that's why I love the monsters. And I think we need that. We need the monsters in our lives, the fictional monsters, in order to basically to find a way to respond and live with the very real evils that we live with. You can see that in the 50s with the rise of the nuclear bomb and nuclear war scares, and then you had all these films about giant mutated ants and giant mutated locusts and giant mutated rabbits. Those all exist because of those type of fears. And with zombie novels, they find that zombie novels, zombie movies, there's actually a rise in them during times of great stress. And actually right now there's obviously a very peak of zombie-related media, because it seems like we're constantly in an era of terror, and we're told day after day, you know, you turn on the television, you have to be scared today. And this is why, you know, and if it's not the killer, it's the Frankenstorm. I mean, whatever you do today, you're going to die by the end of it. You know, that is a guarantee. Tune in tomorrow to find out why. So we need the monsters. We need it to like find a way to, we need something that we feel we can triumph over, you know, and maybe it'll help us get through our day-to-day stuff.
Joe, do you see the bad guys, the murderers in your novels in monstrous terms or strictly human terms?
I think it depends on how you define monsters. If you define monsters like creatures that doesn't have a free will, that are sort of, like I said, they do what they do because they have to do that in order to survive. And I think in that respect, it's interesting. It's almost a philosophical question whether human monsters or the evil human being, whether they have a free will, you know, whether any of us have a free will, or whether we are just doing the things that we feel we have to do. I mean, given a choice, we would, I mean, given the background, our life up to that point, is there any reason why we would choose differently, given a second chance? I'm not sure there is. And if that is the case, we actually doesn't have a free will. We are just, you know, a product of what has happened to us and who we are. And that may be also for human beings as well as for zombies and vampires.
Alan?
Well, I mean, that's an important point, the question of human agency within the constraints that they're presented with. In the case of my books, it's a society that's essentially crumbling. So these are horrible constraints that people were put under, just making a living day to day, finding enough money for food, and there you discover that everyone's sort of capacity for corruption or for what in ordinary times might be considered evil acts is there, and so it's a question of environment as well as agency. So you have, you know, in my book, most people are corrupt, but there are degrees of it, you know, and sometimes it's because maybe people aren't evil or they aren't monsters, but their propensities certainly in that direction, whereas other people are inclined towards goodness, but are put in a position where they can't express it. So I think, you know, there's a spectrum of monstrosity within human life, and it depends on what the constraints are around it.
I'm going to jump ahead because I'm tempted to, because I was reading and readying for today's session. I came across an interview with you, Joe, on the website The Millions, in which you noted, what's jumped out at me was that you were talking about how crime fiction in particular is treated differently in Scandinavia than it is in the United States, and probably even more markedly different in Canada, I suspect. And you said the following. You said you noted that crime fiction in Scandinavia, to write that kind of book is respected. It's prestigious, in fact. And you say almost all the well-known, established, serious writers in Scandinavia have at one time written a crime novel. It's a sort of thing that you do. You must have a go at genre. And it made me try to imagine more locally what an Anne Michaels or an M.G. Vasanji thriller might be like. But I wanted to ask you, but also all of you, how you regard your relationship with genre. Is it a thorn in the side? Is there some, depending on, again, does it depend on context? In certain places, it can be a matter of disqualification. And perhaps in other places, it can be a matter of celebration. But does it bother you? Do you think about it? Does it bug you, or are you, happily flying above it? Joe?
I see the crime novel as just a vehicle for storytelling. Simple as that. When I first started writing, I chose to write a crime novel because I figured that was the easy way out. Just to write your first novel, get it done with, send it to a publishing house, get hopefully a polite letter of refusal saying that we can't publish this, but if you have something else, please send it to us because we see some talent here. That was sort of my plan, but then it was published, and and during the process of writing that crime novel, and I was never a big crime fiction reader, but I realized that you have this very intimate dialogue with your reader in a crime novel, because as soon as they see on the cover that it's a crime novel, they know what it's all about. You are going to show them do something with your left hand while you do the trick with your right hand. So it's almost like a game with your reader, and I really like that you have this this dialogue, but still today, it's not my stories are not really about monsters. They are about telling stories about the main character. I think that most stories are about the main character, and it's not necessarily whether the main character is going to catch the killer or whether he is going to survive physically. I think it's about the eternal soul of the main character. Is it going to make the right choice? Is his soul going to heaven or to hell? And I think that is true for most stories, not only in crime stories.
Corey?
Well, no, I really agree with that. Certainly with my novel, I mean, you can look at it as a zombie novel, or you can look at it as the story of one man who has a very unlucky life, who comes down with a life-threatening illness. Just happens to be cannibalism. Don't judge me. But I mean, I've always, the idea between literature and genre, I mean, I've always tried to sort of approach books by, it's not so much the story, it's how you tell the story. I mean, you can take a story about monsters and you can make it incredibly vivid and romantic and alive, and you can take the exact same elements and make it just an utter, piece of tripe. So it does bug me, the genreification of everything. I mean, I understand. I've been a librarian, so I understand the need to categorize.
Right.
Because you don't want to just throw the books out there and I don't know, it's in that pile somewhere. You need to be able to find it because people have certain tastes and people like certain things. Some people like zombie novels, some people like vampires, witches, killers, serial killers, cops. But just to, it's more the snobbery, the diminishedness of that. I mean, and it seems like you have to be at a certain point before you can write genre fiction when it's considered literature. Like the obvious choice is Margaret Atwood, who has a very acclaimed career for very good reasons. But she writes some, as she calls it, speculative fiction, Oryx and Crake. My question is, if she had started with Oryx and Crake and The Year of the Flood and The Handmaid's Tale, would it have mattered to the rest of her career, and would she still be considered literature, or would she have been automatically dumped into that genre and she could never dig her way out of it? She wouldn't be allowed to dig her way out of it, no matter how good the book is.
Allowance is an interesting term there, yeah. Let's go down the line. Alan?
There was a big fuss made last year during the Booker in London. I mean, if anybody who had any sense of literature was in the middle of it, because a few genre books were chosen on the short list of the Booker, and a lot of the highbrow, sniffy literary types in London were appalled at the fact that this sacred monument to high literature was being besmirched. bespoiled with genre. And so they were threatening to set up a separate prize for high literature. I mean, you have to remember that people like, Dostoevsky wrote genre, Crime and Punishment. Graham Greene, he started with genre. He wrote these entertainments, Brighton Rock and the rest. I think genre, there's more good literature in genre because of the constraints that genre forces on a writer. So if you write as an unconstrained writer, I don't know, I don't do this, but I imagine if you have no constraints on what you can write or what you can say, you have to be pretty damn good to do a good job out of it. But if you have clear borders, some sort of clear definition of where you can go or what your limits should be on this thing, then you work within those limits and you can create something somehow more complete and more maybe user-friendly, more consistently than with high literature.
You're trying to build a better sonnet.
Yes, essentially. I mean, not to compare anybody living now to Shakespeare, but he worked within very tight constraints of what he could write and what stylistically he could do, and it worked very well. It was, there's perhaps a reason why a lot of poetry that rhymes survives.
I think it's the same with music. I mean, it has to do with expectations. I mean, you do expect a certain rhythm pattern in music, and if you don't follow that pattern, you get the attention, but you also get the confusion. It's like in any novel is within a genre. I mean, it's just because it's a novel, it's going to be around 200 and 400 pages. That's a genre.
Unless you're Proust, but
yeah, and like in the TV series now, I mean, the new genre now is 100 hours of TV, which is a great genre. I mean, they're all genres, and we're all relying and playing with the expectations of our readers. If there weren't expectations, it would be very hard to tell a story.
Deb?
I'm almost afraid to open my mouth. Okay, I think I completely get the categorization thing. I think categories and genres are incredibly useful for readers because they do want to be able to go in a bookstore and not have to look at every single book to find out what they're looking for, what their taste is. I think it's a great way to develop reader taste. I think it's a great way, if you're drawn to it, to want to write sort of within a genre. I should say that Shakespeare in his time was actually considered a hack in some ways because he pushed those genre conventions so much that there were people who didn't approve of what he was doing. Similarly, Jane Austen. Mark Twain thought Jane Austen was a complete hack, that she didn't write anything serious. So there's also a weird way in which genre constraints, and specifically a reviewer or a reader's expectation that they understood what a writer's intention was, can become a kind of straitjacket. I get roundly criticized for not maintaining the genre conventions of paranormal romance, which would be valid if I had set out to write a paranormal romance, which I did not. When I started writing, I was just writing fiction. That was my genre, was fiction, as opposed to nonfiction, which was what I had written before. I didn't have any kind of fine-grained sense of whatever is in there. As a result, you can find my book in the horror section, the romance section, the paranormal romance section, fiction, literary fiction, weirdly in the occult nonfiction section. Don't get me started. So there is this kind of, weird thing that gets set up. And I do think that genre can be used very inappropriately as a kind of weapon. I mean, I think you ask a really good question about Margaret Atwood. I think even about Shakespeare. If Shakespeare had started as a poet, would he have been better situated in his career to get his dramatic works, which was what was paying the money, which is what we now often remember for? Poetry was far more prestigious at the time. One of the reasons people wouldn't publish Shakespeare was because, he was kind of one of those dramatic hacks and not taken as seriously. So I think it's a very tricky world that we live in, and I think that it is something, it's a sword that cuts both ways. It's both good and bad, and I think we just need to sort of be aware of that, especially as publishing and marketing gets more and more segmented and more specialized. I think there could be a moment where I think, wow, I kind of wish there wasn't so much sort of what I call, genre policing in some of these areas.
Well, that's that leads into a question I want to ask you all, which is the question you probably get asked the most by everyone, which is, what is your book about, right? I mean, if someone learns on the plane or in a waiting room anywhere, oh, you're a writer, what is your book about? And for me anyway, it's probably the most difficult question to answer. But it's a common question. So I want to ask you about, not necessarily specifically what's your book about, I'm not asking for a synopsis, but rather how you came to your work's aboutness. Why, among all the things that one could write about, where did your about come from? Deb?
I'm really fascinated by the human attraction and repulsion to difference. So what I see around me is a whole lot of people who get quite horrified if somebody didn't go to the right school, doesn't wear the right clothes, it's a different color, it's a different ethnicity, a different religion, and yet they love reading these books in which, strange people who are dead or cannibals or murderers, fall in love with the girl next door and live happily ever after, and everybody wants a vampire boyfriend. And I think, really? You won't even go to this part of town because those people live there, but you want a vampire boyfriend? So for me, it was really about this kind of very vexing human response to difference. And because I'm a historian, trying to look at that in ways that highlight sort of a long history of people trying to grapple with those sorts of ideas. And that's really what drew me to witches and vampires and demons and humans in my story. It really wasn't about, I want to write a paranormal romance. I really want to deal with human difference, and what better way is there to do that than to talk about vampires and our strange relationship to them.
Alan?
It's a sort of forum for psychoanalysis here. I suppose if you boiled it down, my book is about somebody running away, and what's the source of it? Well, you're middle-aged now with lots of responsibilities, and you spend a lot of time thinking about maybe running away.
Do you have family here, Alan?
I have run away for these last 4 days. That's right.
You need a little tag like Paddington Bear, if found.
Exactly.
Are you asking for asylum now?
Corey?
What's it about? Well, I think I wrote it because when I inevitably don't get a Giller nomination, I'll have an excuse. Just, zombies, they were never going to do it. Doesn't matter. No, I think, my book, like I said, it's really about a man who's, it's about disease and illness and coming to grips with that. There's a lot of, and it's also about the search. I don't want to make it sound, way more important than it is, but it's really, as Vonnegut would say, no, it's a search for self. The character, as it turns out, he's never been comfortable in his own body, and because of the way he was brought up. His mother was very condemning, so he never really revealed his homosexuality to her. So he always had to keep that hidden and away from her. So there was that part of his life segmented away. In his work, he's an actor, so he's not actually even playing himself. He's playing other people. He's very rarely allowed to be himself. And even when he becomes a zombie, he's not the classic zombie. He's not shuffling in all appetite. He has appetite and he's falling apart, but he's still got his intelligence. So in a way, he's not even allowed to be a zombie because he's still got moral qualms against it, and he has to justify sticking around and having to, unfortunately, kill some people now and again to keep going. So and that's why I think that's, I'm always drawn to I find myself drawn to characters like that they aren't actors but are reactors. They're not great at running their lives. They just have to react to the things that life throws at them. I find that unfortunately I really relate to that. So,
Joe?
There was a famous Danish writer named Axel Sandmose who once said that the only things worth writing about is love and murder. And he was not a crime writer. But I think that's true. And I think perhaps The Bat and all the books in the Harry Hole series are about love. It's about lost love and the hope to be able to love again and to be loved. And I think that is even the case for the villains in the series. There is a scene in one of my books, The Devil's Star, that was sort of the starting point for that book. I didn't know what the book was going to be about. I just knew that that scene would have to be in the book. And I had, at the time in my life, I bought a waterbed. My doctor said it would be good for my back. And I was lying there and at night, and I would hear these, sounds inside the waterbed, bubbling sounds. And I think that there's probably intelligent life developing inside my waterbed, And it was really scary. And so
let me write that down. That's a great idea.
And so I came up with this scene that there's a woman who has met a man in a bar, and he has taken her home. They're having sex in his waterbed, and while they're having sex, she can feel something between her shoulder blades inside the bed. And so after they made love, he walks off to take a shower, and she pulls off the sheet, and they're pressing against the rubber of the inside of the bed is profile of a naked woman. Sorry.
They're okay with cannibals.
That's a good sound.
You just crossed the line, man.
It's so awesome.
And while she's looking at this woman, she realized that the shower has stopped running, and she can hear the drops of water falling on the wooden floor behind her. And what has happened here is, of course, that this man, this girl inside the bed is his former girlfriend who tried to leave him. So he killed her and undressed her and put her inside the bed, which is not filled with water but with alcohol. So she is there preserved and naked, always ready when he comes home, forever young. So it's kind of it's a little bit twisted, but still a love story. It's a love story, right?
I buy that, actually. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, again, very helpfully, that leads to another question I want to ask. Waterbeds. No. Write what you know, right? That's supposed to be. That's supposed to be a rule. But you all quite clearly don't write kitchen sink quotidian realism. You employ imagination. Obviously, quite stunningly demonstrated by Mr. Nesbø. I just was curious, when you go into the office and you make stuff up. I mean, you really, all four of you, really make stuff up. Obviously, it comes from human experience of your own in some way or another. But you are sort of hypercharging when it comes to imagination. So I'm curious about that process. Is there a kind of a summoning to transition from making breakfast for the kids, and then going into the room and making the magic, or does it just come quite easily to you? And secondly, do you ever feel foolish? Do you ever sort of stop and say, well, I just put a woman in a waterbed, and that was a good day's work, but that's weird. That's a really deeply weird way to spend your time. Dad?
Wow. Okay. I think probably what one of the things writers might have in common is that we live in the same world as the rest of you do, but things just strike us as strange. So there's a whole lot of people who would have had Joe's experience up to the point where they were like, oh God, probably creepy organisms under my bed, inside my bed, and at that point they would have been like, and I'm going to let that go now and go to sleep. Whereas Joe didn't, right? So for me, yesterday I was out on the curb with another writer, Leslie Livingston, and we were watching an entire barrage of armed men in camouflage with leaves on their heads ran by screaming. And then a man in a bear suit. And we looked at each other and said, okay, there's a whole novel right there in that.
Were they running from the man in the bear suit?
No, we asked him that. The bear was like, we said to the bear, are you with them? And he was like, no. And so
take me.
So, and I think that's the exciting thing about writing is when you experience something, when you see something, when you notice something, and you just know you can do something with that. So for me, there's a scene in my first book that involves a yoga class that's populated with demons and vampires and witches. And that came out of me, trying desperately to do downward dog and to disassociate myself from my need to do a perfect downward dog and to let everything go and to be peaceful. And I looked, under my arm, and there was somebody who was like balancing on one ear, and I just thought, well, they're not human. And I thought, oh, they're not human. And I went home and wrote that scene. So it is that kind of that slightly weird take, maybe, that we all have now that I've heard Joe's story. I don't know.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's not a lot of making up there. I used to live on a road in London, just up the road from a famous serial killer called Dennis Nielsen. Not at the same time, I'm just saying. And I'd hop into a cab and tell the name of the road, and inevitably, every cabbie all the way up would recount all of the stuff that Dennis Nielsen did. And it was amazing, all the different details you'd get from various cabbies. It got to the point where I would tell them the neighboring road or just around the corner. I'd say, I'll just direct you. And then you get there, oh, didn't Dennis Nielsen live down this? So you get these stories all the time. I was in a cab yesterday. There was a Nigerian taxi driver, and I said, where did you come from? Lagos. And how did you come to get here? Oh, well, it was convoluted. So what was it? Well, I traveled to Tanzania, and then I was there for a little while, and then I went to Mozambique, and then I had to cross the border at night to get into South Africa, and then in South Africa I worked for a gold mine for a while, and of course the South Africans hate the Nigerians, and it was difficult, and then eventually I got a South African passport, and I went to Israel. I don't know why, but I went to Israel, and in Israel I bought a Swazi passport to get to Canada. And I went to Canada, and of course, once I got here, I had to destroy the passport so that they couldn't send me back. And then I was in a camp in Montreal for a while, and then finally they just gave up on me and let me stay here. And that's in 5 minutes you've got a fantastic novel. It's so it doesn't take much. I mean, the story itself is they just pop up all the time. It's a matter of sitting down and doing the 3 months or 4 months of work that expands on the story. That's the
Yeah, Corey?
Sorry, I went agog. 4 months? You can write a book in 4 months? Yeah, I don't have an office. I don't know. What was the question again?
I've forgotten too. It's about writing what you know, but at the same time, you're writing in your case, a novel about a zombie. So that there's a greater leap, arguably, but perhaps not. It's not interesting. It sounds like what you're all saying so far is that it's that it is all reality based. It's just a matter of torquing. But do you feel not foolish? But I'm just curious. Do you ever feel like an element of strangeness in the project, an element of not many people are doing what I'm doing right now. That makes me feel, why me?
Yes. No, I mean, let's face it, this is a weird story. I didn't know, my first novel, I had far more of an idea of where I wanted it to go, and I had more of an outline in my head, and I used, I think probably as most novelists or authors do, is a lot more from my own life in terms of certain scenes, certain elements. But this one was, I honestly started with the first sentence, which was kind of sticking in my head for some reason, and I just decided to follow it and see where it went. And I knew from the first sentence that this person was going to be dead, so then I put him on the autopsy table and just decided to see what would happen. So I honestly didn't know from day to day, or week to week, because I'm not that dedicated a writer, I didn't know where it was going. So a lot of it really caught me off guard.
What's the first sentence? I mean, sorry.
I miss breathing. I don't know why. It's not a great sentence, but it's certainly evocative, I guess. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a silliness to it. When I met my editor and I was talking about some editing changes, I'm going, and then this happens, and then at one point Johnny Depp comes into the story, and then he's kidnapped, and I just stopped and go, why the hell did you take this? This sounds absolutely stupid. I can't summarize it in 3 words. It took me forever. So yeah, I feel very silly. And with stuff like this, and I feel very silly sometimes talking about it because it's not a serious novel. I didn't intend for it to be a serious novel. It was just an idea that I had, and when you read it over, a lot of subtext comes out that I didn't actually intend. It was not in my mind when I wrote it. When I start editing it, you can flesh some of that out because you realize, oh wow, there's these different layers that I didn't see at first. But I've lost the train of thought again. So
Well, let's throw it over to Joe. I'm curious about this, the sort of the imagination,
the silliness of writing. Yeah, well, I grew up in a family where we were all storytellers, especially my father. So when we had dinner, we would constantly fight to get to tell stories, but my father told the most stories and the longest stories, and I knew at a young age that 8 out of 10 of his stories, they were exaggerations, and the last 2 were just simple lies. So, but he would every time we called him lying, he would refer to a German scientist, Sepp Windler, who he claims in 1968 won the Nobel Prize for a work where he proved that in families where they lie on a regular basis, the average lifespan is 7 years longer than in other families. And so I guess I grew up in an environment where I thought it was healthy to lie and come up with silly stories. And I can remember in school where I love writing essays, long essays, but the teacher was a bit worried because we would write essays like, you probably do that here too, like A Nice Day in the Woods. And I would write that essay, only in my stories nobody came back alive. So my teacher would call my mother, who would blame my father. So it was never silly, but the idea that you would actually get paid to make up stories, that was that was a surprise to me, that I would end up making a living doing what my father did for free.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. But we have been asked, at least the title of today's discussion does ask us to talk about the future of the novel. So I wanted to ask if you have any insights about not necessarily the future of the novel, and I don't want, at least I'm not interested in the question of ebooks and all that. So not so much the format, but what those words are, what the kind of stories we're going to be telling in the future, and particularly we mentioned or the word serious has come up a few times, and I wanted to ask, here's Cormac McCarthy is writing screenplays now and seems to be exclusively writing thrillers. I mean, they're brilliant, but they are, we talk about genre. I mean, that's where he is. Margaret Atwood is writing a zombie serial. And publishers are certainly in my experience, hungry for, ravenous for the crossover novel, right? The novel that, whatever that means. I'm not sure what it means. But I presume it means the novel that kind of speaks to the whole audience, that it kind of obliterates the question of category altogether, that all readers can enjoy it, the quote serious and the quote unserious. So what's your insight into the future of the novel, in particular relation to the idea of seriousness? Is it a prospect that Harold Bloom is going to be pulling? I don't think he has hair, but if he had hair, he'd pull it out because he's concerned about, it's just a matter of dumbing down. You know, we're giving the book prizes to Stephen King. This is a bad thing. We're getting stupider. Or is it a matter of an exciting prospect of breadth and doing away with these limitations of, quote, commercial fiction, quote, genre, etc.? Deb? I know you want to get in there.
Well, again, I just think, under those rules, Shakespeare's not winning any prizes in his own time. Austen's not winning any. There's a real problem here with that whole notion that somehow in this moment we can either identify or award sort of something based on some sense that, well, that's serious, that lasts, because we can't. I mean, history tells us this. We don't know. Some of the most lasting, most vital pieces of literature were dismissed as unserious before. And I think it is damaging to writing. I think it's bad for writers. I think it's bad for readers. And I think that these sorts of distinctions, these weapon-like distinctions, just are, I hope they disappear. I don't think they will, because I think for whatever reason, we seem to really need them. But I just would ask everybody to be a little bit humble before they dismiss something as being unserious, and just realize that you actually don't, historically speaking, have a very good chance of being able to assess what is serious or not in a given moment. You can say what you like. You might have aesthetic considerations that you can say, this is better on these grounds than this. But we're storytellers. That's what we are. We're just storytellers. And I would like to see us get back to that sense of a writer's identity and not all this literary genre stuff.
I'm not terribly worried about the future of storytelling. In my day job, I write about economics and markets and stuff like that. And there's a phenomenon in markets called noise, which is that, things happen randomly. But of course, it's not nobody wants the explanation. Why did the markets do this today? Noise. I mean, nobody wants that. They want a story. So you spend, as a journalist, in the markets, you spend your whole time sitting down and coming up with an interesting story to explain why you are where you are, even though 95% of the time it's noise. It's just random. But randomness doesn't suit people. They don't like to be told at the end of it, it just happened. Sorry, that's, there's no explanation for it. Editors hate that. So they say, come up with a story. Why did this happen? You talk to people in the markets. Some people have one idea. Another group will have another idea. Often they'll be exactly contradictory. But out of that, you sort of come up with some sort of story, and that satisfies people. And they don't believe it necessarily, but they like the story, and that makes them, makes them feel better for the fact that something might have an explanation. People in the markets know that the explanation will probably be wrong, or that it's probably nonsense. But even people who have spent decades doing this stuff always feel a little bit better having a story behind something. And I think that's just the way people are. They like having a story to explain something, whether it's random or whatever happens behind it. They just like stories. They like to have life put into some simple, straightforward narrative. And that's the way we are. And so I think, until geneticists change us, we're stuck with stories.
Corey?
Well, I agree. I mean, yeah, we need stories. I think the human condition requires stories. I mean, certainly, I don't know why, because from the earliest times, people couldn't figure out, what are those dots in the sky? Well, let's come up with a story to explain it, and that's, from there on, it's story. So I think it's probably now genetic. It's in our code somehow through evolution that storytelling is a major part of how we get ideas across. I don't think everything needs to be a story. I think that the push towards storifying, say, in the news media has really dumbed down journalism. And like trying to, oh, we got to encapsulate it in a story. It's like, just tell me the damn facts. Don't give me the story. Or don't make up a story, or don't make up something that doesn't need to be there, which is, don't sensationalize it with a story. Just tell me what happened, and then allow me to figure it out, to make up in my mind on something on that. But, that's just my personal opinion. It has nothing to do with novel writing. But I like storytelling. It's not going to go away. But I do think, like you said, the crossover novel that they're looking for, I don't think you can write that intentionally. If you do, it's going to be very mundane and completely uninspired. I mean, I think you have to write what you want to write. And if people want to read that, enough people want to read it, then they will. But you can't, if you aim it solely as a product, it's going to suffer. There has to be something of yourself in there. No matter what. I mean, many novelists, and Joe, here, you write series with the same characters, and that's when it's done right, as you do. I mean, there's a lot of yourself in there. And it's breathtaking the way you can continue the characters and keep them interesting and keep them alive. But you don't approach it. I mean, it is your business, but you don't approach it solely from the business angle. It's when you approach it from a business angle, and now I'm just going to make money off of it. That's when it ceases. I think that's the line when it ceases to actually become anywhere near literature. And now it's like it's a Barbie doll.
Right.
I think that is absolutely true. I think that writing and storytelling is not, you can't go visit people where you think they are. You have to invite them to your home and just hope that they will come and that they will like your company. I think that is what storytelling is about and will continue to be about. And I'm also optimistic, not because I think people are getting smarter. They are actually getting dumber. It's a fact. I just read it. The IQ in the IQ in the Western world has gone slightly down the last 10 years. It's been going up, for the last 100 years, but or since they started measuring IQ, since the war or something. But in the Western world, it's going slightly down, and in the rest of the world, it's going a little bit up. Anyway. I do think that readers also in the future will want to get challenged. I think if you look, for example, at TV series, like I mentioned, I think the most interesting part of storytelling right now is going on commercial TV and cable. I just watched Mad Men last night. And I don't know whether it's a big commercial success, but at least it's a success. People watch it and they talk about it. And 20 years ago, I think we wouldn't have been ready for a TV series like that. So I'm optimistic about storytelling. I think people will go on liking to have quality and challenging stories.
That's great. Thank you all. We're going to open things up now to the floor. If anyone has any questions, please come on up to the, I think there's two, there's two microphones. So please step on up. And again, if you have a question, we might as well get the sort of the town hall style lineup. That's great. Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering, you were talking about categories, why you think that an author like John Banville would write his fiction and then he would change his name and write his mysteries. Why do you think that an author as famous as he is would do that?
Deb, can we start with you?
I don't know, because there are probably a whole lot of reasons that are possibilities. It's perhaps the advice that somehow readers would get confused, which I don't think readers would be, or that you would set up two writerly identities. When I announced to my colleagues I was going to stop writing academic fiction for a short period and write novels about witches and vampires, they said, but you'll be doing that under a different name. I said, no, actually I won't be. And they were a little perplexed. So I don't know, because it's not an impulse that makes sense to me. Maybe it does to one of the gentlemen here.
Well, it's funny, I do get asked, what name do you publish under?
Mine.
Yeah, well, I've got a pretty handy one. But it's you know, maybe it's because they're worried about different markets. And maybe it's a question for publishers. I mean, maybe that's, or you know, or the people who drive the business side of things.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I mean, I know that after my book came out, I thought, oh, I should have gone under an alias just so that people would call me something cooler. I love your novel, Joe Kickass. Yes. And just signing that, Joe Kickass. Yeah.
Mr. Kickass, your table's ready.
That's right. Well, I think probably in Banville's case, and in a lot of cases, I mean, he had, and still has, obviously, a reputation. And this what he wrote as, was it Benjamin Black? I mean, it's not so different from what he wrote before, but it's different enough that he didn't, if it was his own choice, he didn't want to say either unsettle regular readers or have that book judged, and people who wouldn't normally read his work would stay away from it. Because by doing the mystery, you are going to reach a different, you're expanding your reach to a different genre. And with his name on it, though, if he's considered high literary, that scares some people, and they might not have come to it. So by putting it under a different name, getting some good reviews, it does attract it. It might actually be a very canny marketing technique. Then again, I don't know why later on you reveal yourself, you know, ta-da, you're all suckers, you know? But I mean, maybe it's also that, I don't know, maybe it's, I think, like you said, people are kind of stupid. I mean, or marketers think that people are stupid. Like Deborah said, like, I think people would have read his novels, very likely. But I mean, you're talking about a business that I always loved when the movie came to here, The Madness of King George. It was actually the Madness of King George II, but they cut the second off in North America because they didn't want people to think it was a sequel. That is absolutely true. And people are like, where was, I didn't see the first one.
Yeah.
How did he get mad? Was he only irate?
He was livid.
It's awesome.
Well, I'm going to try to defend that, why they would use another name. Myself, I also write children's books, but I use the same name when I do that. But I think that it may have to do with context. We always read stories in context, and as storytellers, we prefer to not interfere with the story or stand in the way for the story in a way. That's the problem when writers become celebrities. The problem is that they will sort of, you know, shadow for the story itself. They become part of the context for the story. So I can understand that famous writers, when they write something that is completely different, they don't want to have noise, to be noise in the story. So they want a different name.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this question is more specific to Mr. Nesbø. Well, I can't see him. All right. What or who was your inspiration for the character of Harry Hole?
Well, it was a local soccer player in a small town where I grew up. His name was Harry, and it was also the name Hole, or Hole, as it's pronounced in Norwegian. That was the name of the local police officer where my grandmother lived. And me and my brother, we used to go there for summer holiday, and then she would always say that if you're not home and in bed by 8 o'clock, then Hole will come get you. And I would always imagine this tall, blonde guy with cold blue eyes, and actually many years later, I was at a funeral, and this old man would come up to me and give me, you know, a bony, small hand, and say that I'm Hole, and he was really scary looking. You know, my first thought was that, but it's not 8 o'clock yet.
Yes, ma'am.
We've talked a little bit this morning about context, and in this day and age, we're witnessing remarkable convergence of media. And it seems to me that we've got books, we've got ebooks, and then we're getting into the, you know, soon to be a movie. We've got the Facebook. We have, I know Deborah, somebody went on Pinterest and put a really lovely collage together. And yet I'm reminded of Marshall McLuhan, who said, you know, the medium is the message. And I guess what fascinates me is, does this convergence impact the creative process of the writer, or do you think it has a greater impact on the business of writing? What publishers look for, what gets published, how it gets published?
Deb?
I think you have to be, as a writer, given the barrage of information that's coming at you, often from readers, from what the publisher is able to sort of tap into in terms of audience response, in terms of, you know, marketing, from if it is something that is, you know, soon to be a film, and then suddenly you get calls from people saying, you know, would you say that your average readership is 18 to 35, or is it 19 to 38? You know, you're like, I don't know. But you know, I think you as the writer have to be quite good about setting up walls and being able to sort of engage on the other side of the wall, but then retreat behind it. As for the business side of it, I couldn't possibly answer that. But certainly from my perspective, the kind of feedback loop with readers is something that I just have to kind of be able to shut off at certain points.
So does it come down then from your perspective as writers who are successful, it comes down to staying true to yourself as a creative artist and focus on being the very best storyteller you can be, and just leave the rest of it aside?
For me, it's a commitment to the characters. It's staying true to the characters. So there's a whole lot of ideas of what, you know, other people would do with my characters, but I actually know them better. And so I just have to, especially I think this may be more vital in a series where you're visiting the same, you know, I have a really good sense and can sort of say, no, that's not going to work for these reasons. And I just have to know that and be instinctive about it and not second guess it. And when I put it in those terms, it's much more straightforward than sort of me sort of thinking in an abstract way, I have to protect my creative process. But Joe may have other sort of thoughts about that.
Let's go, we can go down the line.
I'm not entirely sure I understood the question, but in my day job, it used to be that I'd go into the office, I'd write a story, and then I'd go home or whatever. You know. Now you go into the office, you write a story, somebody says, can you do 5 minutes of television? So you do 5 minutes of television. Can you do a radio bit? So you do a radio bit. Oh, but you've got to tweet that, so you tweet it. And you know, you've got all these multiple ways of talking to people. You know, a book is like talking to people for a long time. They're sort of a captive audience. They're sitting next to you on the plane. You've got 8 hours to, you know, to bore them or to tell them an interesting story. But you know, all of these things. You know, you can tweet in 140 characters. You can write a book in 400 pages. You can write a a newspaper piece in 500 words. You can do a 3-minute spot on TV or whatever, but it's just talking to people. And so these are just, these are just different ways of transmitting your thoughts and what you have to say to people. You modify what you can say into the sort of time period and space that you've got, but essentially it's just, it's talking to people, I think.
Corey?
Well, I don't know much about let's say the business side of it. I think if I knew much about business, I probably wouldn't be writing books. But I just, in terms of like audience, you know what? I just write for me. I can't write for another person. And I know Cory Doctorow mentioned this yesterday, and I completely agree with him that there are. I know a number of authors who, when they write, they get feedback from their spouse or their friends on chapter by chapter by chapter. But I can't do that. I can't have people giving me, say, criticism or advice on stories that I haven't completed yet. The story's not done, so I don't want input as to where you think it should go, because it's my story. And I don't, when I'm writing the story, I don't care about anyone else. I don't care about entertaining anyone else. I care about entertaining myself, because why else am I doing this? I'm not getting paid by the word. So I have to be entertained. That's the only way, and maybe that's selfish. I don't know. But I'm gratified that other people apparently want to read it and are enjoying it. And I'm really happy when that happens. And when it doesn't happen, well, it's like, well, I guess I didn't write it for you. I mean, I wrote it for me, and you're not me. So, did you pay for it? Then I'm okay with your opinion. You should buy it again just to serve me right.
Well, I don't write my books for myself, but I write them for 2 friends of mine. They are, the readers that I had in my mind when I started writing. Those were 2 friends with whom I studied together with them, and we share taste in popular culture, I guess. So I guess I wanted to impress those 2 guys. They don't know who they are, but sometimes they will read one of my books, and they will come up and maybe if they're in good mood, they will say that I read your last book, it wasn't too bad, and they made my day. That's my audience, and I certainly don't think you can write for a publisher or write for a big audience. Like I said, you have to invite your readers to your own home, and I think it was Tom Waits who said that when he released Swordfish from Bones, and he finally had some commercial success. All the journalists came to him and asked him, "What did you do now, to sort of get this success?" And he said, "I have no idea. I've been doing the same thing for 15 years. I didn't come to you; you came to me." And I think it has to be that way. And I think in order to have good stories, you have to trust that. And I think you can tell when you read. You have to trust that the writer is telling a story from his or her heart. That's the only way to tell a good story, and it's and I think it's the only way. If you want commercial success, that is also the only way to commercial success, is to stay true to your instincts as a storyteller.
Yes, ma'am.
This is a question for Harry Ho. You left us hanging in your last book. Is there another Harry Ho in the works?
Excuse me?
You left us hanging with your last book.
Oh yeah, I did.
With
yes.
Harry.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Is there another one in the works?
Yeah, this is breaking news, and yes, it is.
There is.
It is. Yes, it's going to get published next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we have time for a quickie.
All right.
So to speak.
My question was, in writing about witches and zombies and vampires and these sort of fantastical creatures, how much research goes into actually looking up facts that previously existed about these creatures, and how much sort of just springs forth from your mind?
Well, I mean, I don't think, I can't speak for vampires, but I don't think you can possibly write about something that's already been discussed without being aware of that, obviously. There are certain books and certain movies that actually kind of bug me. I know that it's, actually this is a vampire film, Near Dark, which is a great vampire film, but they never once say vampire in it. And you know, this guy gets bit and he's transformed, and no one ever says vampire. And like, come on, you're all vampires, you know you're vampires. Just say it, you know, it's not a secret. You know, so I think you have to, and that always bugs me. It's like in any movie where, you know, you see people acting in a way that if they'd ever seen a movie, they would never do this. You know, and they exist in this universe where no one's invented television yet, apparently. It was just invented yesterday, so no one knows. Don't go into the old abandoned, you know, watch factory. It seems obvious now. So you, I like...
Watch factory?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's good.
Write that down, write that
It's
down.
a Canadian thing, Joe. It's
That's right. It's a Swiss thing. What was the question? It's about watches?
Oh, researching the supernatural.
Yes. Well, you know, with mine, I'm obviously aware, and my character is aware of the classic zombies. And he actually does talk about this at one time. It actually goes back to the idea of the Haitian voodoo before George Romero started it, and the zombie of that. And there's been research, I think it was Wade Davis's book where I read this, that people became zombies in Haiti, but because they were cursed. But it worked. I mean, they're not really dead, but they've been brought up to believe that this is what's going to happen to you. So if this person is cursed, knows he's cursed, put into the ground and comes up, he behaves like a zombie because he believes he's supposed to behave like a zombie. And he's been culturally conditioned to behave like a zombie. So my zombie at one time says, do I really want to eat humans as food? Do I need that? Or is it just because I've been told by all these movies that this is what I have to eat? You know, and if you had, like, say, like an Amish zombie, you know, would it just go after, you know, vegetables? I don't know. But you know, I mean that.
The whole idea of an
The short
Amish zombie
answer is maybe.
I think for me, it's sort of, you know, I am a historian and a professor, so oddly enough, you know, I don't actually get out much in popular culture. You know, somebody said to me, what have you read recently? I said, things published after 1600 or before 1600, you know? So for me, a lot of what I write about is actually steeped in a literature that is very much older than what a lot of people draw on when they write these sorts of tales. And I think I felt the most latitude for me with the vampire because actually vampires don't really appear in much Western European literature until the 18th century, which is beyond my research specialty. So I was like, well, who knows what they thought about them then? I'm just going to go for it and think about what makes sense to me. But so it's an interesting blend of sort of knowing something about the very deep history of some of these creatures, not knowing much about modern popular culture, because I tend not to have my finger on that pulse all that much, and then kind of cobbling something in between.
Well, thanks. Thank you all. I think well, our time is up. But thank you for coming. Please join me in thanking our great writers today.